So, Chris, how exactly did you end up working with the Foo Fighters for Color in the Shape?
What happened was, I say they'd been recording, and obviously they decided after the initial sessions to scrap a lot of it, drums and some guitars and stuff like that. And it was, Gil and Dave both thought this is not, it's not cutting it for whatever reason. So everything was suddenly, they only had a finite time and and I guess a finite budget. I don't know about the budget, but they had to get it done, and so they wanted someone to come in and start helping with the mixing of it. And Gil and I had worked together before, and we were good friends. And he had known, he knows sort of what. And I was asked to send. I remember I was asked to send a kind of a show reel of stuff that I've mixed for Dave to hear. And the only comment that came back was, "Okay, yeah, fine. Don't like the compression on the drums that you use. Don't do that." That was it. I'm like, okay, So I can't. Did I? I'm trying to remember if Gil sent me some rough mixes. He might have done. I don't have them anymore, but he might have sent me some rough mixes of the song, so I had a rough idea what they were going to sound like. But I don't know that. But anyway, so I got on the plane, went over to LA. I said it was in January. I think it was miserable weather. It was just awful. When I landed, it was just like, oh, And I went straight to the studio and just got going.
Were you ever physically in the studio when they were recording? Like, were you with them, or were you always separate?
Well, I was only there for the mixing, and we were in two separate studios. I did actually go down, let's say in the evening, to drop, mixes of like overnight mixes of how we were doing, and I'd hang out with them a little bit. And so, I was there, I think, when Dave was doing some guitars or something. But it's, even though I was like part of the team to do it, and there's this kind of there's a thing you have in studios that anybody who's been in a band or in studios will know what I mean about this, that you get a kind of a little family, a little thing going on in the studio, and when somebody new or who isn't part of the team comes down, it's really weird. It upsets the balance. It's just different. Suddenly it's like, oh, okay, who is this guy, sort of thing. And so I didn't really hang around because I'm very aware of that, and it's the same if I'm producing a band or whatever, and somebody from the record company comes down, and that's great, it's lovely to see them or whatever, and we play them some, and it's all very nice. But when they've gone, it takes a little while for everybody to reset back into that, the vibe we were in before, where we're in our own little bubble and everybody has their in jokes and and so consequently I didn't really hang around. I mean, I probably could have done, but I was quite aware of that. I was the new boy coming in.
Yeah. Hey, well, good on you for being self-aware, because a lot of people are just completely oblivious to those types of things. But
well, yeah, I mean, it's because I've been around the block, so I understand how it works, and I am aware of that, because it is, you're sitting there and thinking, look, it's nice to have you here, man, but I really wish you'd fuck off,
I'm sure they didn't feel that harshly about you.
I hope not. Funnily enough, though, I remember when I finished it, the mixing, and I really was not sure that I'd done a good job. A lot of people, and I'm one of them, I had a lot of self-doubt about it. That I thought, everyone seems happy with it and it's exciting, but is it though? I was starting to really second guess myself, and I really wasn't sure. And it was only after it came out and people were going, "Oh God, this is we love this kind of thing." I could almost like go, okay. Because it was a big deal. I wanted it to sound as exciting as possible, and I thought it did. And then suddenly I was like, but what if it doesn't? What if people hate it? Kind of thing. So, like a lot of people. So it was only when the record finally came out and people were like, oh yeah, this is great. Oh, we love it, kind of thing, that I actually sort of breathed a sigh of relief. You know what I mean? I wasn't that confident. I thought I'd done a good job, but I don't know. I needed it, sort of validation, if you like, from the public, I suppose, kind of thing. I mean, it's not like I sat at home, not sleeping, but I really wasn't sure that have I done a good enough job? And I think I did in the end. I think it turned out okay.
So just a general question about yourself. How did you get into music?
Well, I played in, like a lot of people, I played in bands at school. And, you know, when I was about like sort of, you know, 15, 16, playing in punk rock bands. I mean, I was 16 in 1978. So I was like perfect time for the first wave of punk rock. And I was just like, yeah, this is great. So played in some terrible bands and my best friend at school got a job in a recording studio, a guy who's become an incredibly successful music producer and mixer called Tim Palmer, who's mixed Pearl Jam's 10. He's done, I mean, all kinds of stuff. But we've known each other since we were like 13. And he got a job in a recording studio, and he, you know, we played in groups together, as I say. And then he, after like a year and a half, he gave me a call and said, "Look, we need another tea boy, literally somebody to make the tea and, you know, run around and clean the toilets." You know, I was like, "I'm your man," you know. So I did. So I started when I was like, I think I just turned 19 or something like that, 18 or 19. And I went up to a studio in London called Utopia and started literally just as a runner and worked my way up. And sort of, you know, I wanted to work with guitar bands, but a lot of the bands that the studio was really known for was a lot of kind of funky jazz kind of funk bands, and it was good. It was good grounding. And the engineer who trained me, John Maxwith, who was a fantastic engineer, he did a great job. But I really wanted to work with some rock bands. And so, and so a few came in. So after about 5 years or so, I went freelance as an engineer and hooked up with a producer and just started working with guitar bands because that's what I wanted to do really badly. So, and eventually, you know, my name got around or whatever, and Gil and I did a couple of projects together, and, you know, it sort of snowballed, really. It was really fun. I mean, it was, you know, I look back now, I mean, it was, you know, it's just 30, when did I start? 82? So it's like 37 years, I think I've been doing this now, which is ridiculous, you know.
Crazy. Do you prefer mixing digitally now or the way it used to be with the analog?
It's funny, people ask me that. I think I prefer it now, actually. There was a crossover period. I used to enjoy mixing analog on the big desk, but then that's all I knew. There wasn't any other way of doing it. So it's not like I had the opportunity. I could do both. Now I suppose I could, but why would I? In fact, friends of mine who still had the big mixing desks and all the knobs and faders and stuff, and they sold them. It was just like, you know, it's more work to mix like that. It has a certain sound, and, you know, you could, but arguably, I wouldn't say records sound any better then. It's like people will say, "Oh, you know, the 60s, you know, the Beatles, they sound great." Go, yeah, they do. It was a great engineer and great producer, but there was a lot of terrible sounding records made in the 1960s as well on the same equipment, you know, and it's the same, you know, people say, "Oh, it'd be great to work on tape." And I'm like, I don't miss that at all. I really don't. You know, it was, there are so many things I can do now quickly. And, you know, like just for instance, you want to hear something what it sounds like backwards, you know, like, oh yeah, it'd be great. You know, it's like, okay, well in the old days you had to turn the tape over, work which track you could record on, play your part, turn the tape back over again. Is it okay? Does it sound right? No, do it again. Nowadays, I could just, with a press of a button, bing, I can turn whatever part you play backwards. There you are, done. Let's have a listen to it. Does it sound good? Yeah. So, you know, it was more of an ordeal getting things done, but we found ways of doing stuff. You know, that's the thing. You know, so I suppose technically it was more, as an engineer, it was more exciting because you had to figure out ways of doing things, but I don't miss it. I really don't.
Yeah, I went to film school, and it's not exactly the same experience, obviously, but for first year film school, we had to film with actual film cameras and film strips, and then we had to splice it, tape it together, play it on a reel, see how it works, and I mean, and then like your fingerprints would smudge it, and it would like not come across like, so I mean, yeah, it was cool, but it was not really practical. You know what I mean?
I mean, as I say, you know, I mean, the reason that we did everything on tape then is because that's all there was. There wasn't an alternative. It wasn't like, you know, it's like, okay, I'm going to work digitally now. There wasn't anything else. So we got the best that we could out of it, you know, and when I started, it was already, you know, I was late to the game in 82, you know, already been tape playing for years, you know. I was there in the crossover, which was kind of interesting. So I've seen all sides of it, from just purely analog to digital coming creeping in, and then fully digital.
So, Chris, what was it like working with Dave Grohl in particular during the Foo Fighters sessions?
I only really hung out with Dave in the studio. I did meet the rest of them. Pat Smear came down, and Nate came down. In fact, that was the only guys in the band at that point, because it was a 4-piece at that point, wasn't it? Because William had left. This was the other thing. I got a phone call, actually, maybe like 3 days into working, saying, had I seen William? Because he had actually sort of left and decided that, he didn't really want to be involved anymore. And I think he'd popped in once or something like that, very briefly. I said, no, I don't know where he is. And it got resolved in the end, and it wasn't my place to start, talking about that. But so the first time I met Dave, and it's kind of a funny story, actually. I was in the studio, and again, if people who have done what I do will understand this, that you sometimes want to listen to a familiar piece of music in an unfamiliar place to give you an idea of how a room sounds. So I was very familiar with Nevermind at the time. It was obviously a massively popular record and everybody loved it, and it sounded fantastic and exciting. So I was at Skip Sailor, and I had it on the CD player cranked, and I'm listening to it. Okay, right, it's this amount of bottom end or blah blah blah. And as I'm doing that, I suddenly turn around and I'm aware that behind me is Dave Grohl, and I'm thinking, wow, this is embarrassing. And so I just said, oh man, I said, this is really embarrassing. I said, I just wanted to hear what the room sounded like. And he goes, no, it's fine. It's a great record. Of course you can. I was like, and so this was my introduction to Dave. And he was lovely. He was, he's really easy to work with. And any changes we had to make, he was specific at the beginning in the mixing. The one thing he was very specific about is compression on drums. He did not want compression on drums, which has a certain sound, and particularly a sound of the 90s, a real whack you get on the snare drum, which you get from using a compressor. And he did not want that to happen. He didn't want it on the drum. So I had to find a way, and it's a very default setting for a lot of mixing engineers to use compression on a snare drum. So I had to find a way around it, which is fine, but that was kind of it. Apart from that, he was just get on with it, he was fine. And Pat came down and Nate came down, and they just really just to say hello and have a listen, and they were so busy recording right to the last minute.
It's funny you mentioned Nevermind, because I was actually I wanted to ask you a Nirvana related question. It's because this was in '97 or like late '96, early '97 when this recording was happening. Nirvana, I mean, obviously just ended less than 3 years prior. Was there any sort of like Nirvana hangover kind of a feeling going on with the band?
No, not at all. I mean, the only thing that was the same really was same manager, John Silver, who again I'd worked with a long time ago with a band, so we had a nice relationship anyway, and John had managed Nirvana. So that was the only thing. I mean, it was never really talked about. I mean, maybe they talked about it some more in the recording when they're in the recording studio and talking about stuff. I don't know, but no, not at all. This was like a whole new thing.
Okay, that's good to hear, because I always because I'm very familiar with Nirvana, but I'm not as familiar with the Foo Fighters, and I've always heard that, especially in the beginning of the Fighters, there was a lot of people who were upset at Dave for actually having started a new band. Right away.
I can imagine there probably were. I mean, people get upset for the weirdest things, and also people get very proprietorial about music. You know what it's like. It's like you find some new band, and then they have a hit record, and it's like, this is no good. This is my band. I love this. People don't like change. And they say it's like, no. You did Nirvana. You can't do anything else. Certainly not play guitar. But no, there was nothing like that at all. It was very, and say I was there to do a job, and just get on with it. It was pretty easy, to be honest with you.
That's awesome. And was there, you touched on it a little bit, was there any tension at all with the whole William situation going on during this session?
No, not at all. I say again, they kept that very much to the recording studio side of things. So that was that gang, in the mixing studio so it was a separate place. No, not at all. When they came down for that, that's all was talked about. I say, apart from, I got this phone call just saying, had I seen William? And I was like, no, I haven't seen William at all. I don't know. So that wasn't talked about. It was just, so it was a very, people have asked me before about it, and it was actually a very straightforward record to mix. It was a lot of fun to mix because the songs are great. And I was given pretty much free rein to get on with it. There wasn't anybody hanging over my shoulder or anything. So again, a lot of it was because they were still recording, so they couldn't anyway. They had to get stuff finished.
So Chris, let's talk a little bit about Everlong. What was your experience like working on that song?
Well, because it was the main problem I had with that one was actually technically because the vocal, the way Dave sings it in the verses, is very low and upfront sort of sound. He's right at the bottom of his register, and it's a very tricky thing to get that vocal to sit up front and be sort of sitting on top of the track so you can hear everything done. But when he gets down low, it gets very boomy, and it's just this effect you get called a proximity effect. When somebody gets very close to a microphone, you get this big boom. And I was really struggling. I didn't, because nowadays with digital, you could program an equalizer to filter this and do all the things, but I couldn't do that then. So I had to figure out. And luckily, they had this box in all the effects and equipment at Skip Sailor, this Yuri box, which basically filtered out low end, in a kind of very clever compressor way. And it really saved my bacon because I didn't know quite how I was going to do this because it was really tricky. And also getting the drums to sit right on that track, because he's playing this kind of almost like disco drums on it, which was actually Gil's idea, I believe, with these sort of 16 hi-hats. And so again, getting that to sound kind of rocking, but also it couldn't sound too lots of room and stuff like that. So it was a tricky one to do. That was a really tricky track to get right, actually, out of all of them. But we got there and it was fine in the end. But it was a tough one, and it was getting the vocals to sit right was really difficult.
How long did you work on that particular song, Everlong?
All of them probably took about 2 days to mix, like a day and a half, 2 days tops. So what would happen is I would start, if I'd done Monkey Wrench, say, for instance, like that, which was, say, the first one I did. And that took a while because that was, you're finding your way around the sounds. Generally, they were fairly uniform between each song. So, Pat's guitar sound didn't change a great deal between the songs. So once I kind of got his sound right on the board, I knew that it would be, give or take, kind of the same sort of sound for the next track. So, but you're finding out about the drums. You're getting the drums to sit right. The equalization on the guitars. So the first one always takes longer. So Monkey Wrench probably took a couple of days to get right. And then what would happen is in the morning, the guys would come down. Well, it was really just Gil and Dave, and we'd listen through and they'd say, maybe let's have the bass guitar up in this part, or as Dave would have it, let's have more guitars in this part, as always. And, is the vocal too loud or too quiet or something like that? Be a few little adjustments here and there. And so we'd probably wrap up get that all done by about 1:00, something like that in the afternoon. And then I'd print the mix again onto analog 1/2-inch tape. That was the other thing. Technically, we really slammed it onto a 1/2-inch tape. We tried the different levels of mixing, and that way sounded best to us. So that's how we did it. And then I'd start the next track and start setting up for the next song. So I would say then work till about 9:00 at night and get that right. And then the band would come in, and I'd do a couple of hours more in the morning, and then Dave and Gil would come in. And we'd sit there. So I'm reckoning, say, about a day and a half for each song, something like that. It wasn't wasn't crazy. It wasn't like it was like Def Leppard, 2 weeks per mix or anything like that. It's a rock and roll band. I mean, there's how much can you do? It's guitar, bass, and drums. It's the most important thing to me was just making it sound as exciting as possible. I'd never seen them play live. I had no idea. I mean, I don't even know if they had really done any gigs by that point. And the first album was obviously all Dave. So I wanted it to sound as exciting as I imagined it was gonna be, and with the way that Dave's slamming on the drums as well, it's like it's exciting straight away. You know what I mean? It's like it's a massive racket, and you got to push the guitars as loud as you can before things start disappearing. That's the way I worked it.
That's awesome. Well, one of the things, just going back to Evermind, just go back to combining the two, going back to Everlong for a second. One thing I've always enjoyed about the mix is actually the very beginning. It's kind of that low, sort of muted guitar, and then there's that flush, that chord.
It's it's balancing. I mean, it's like they used to call mixing engineers balance engineers. That's what they were technically called. You'd be a balance engineer.
Really?
Yeah, and that because that's literally what you're doing is you are creating a balance between the instruments, between the guitars and the drums and the bass guitar and the vocals and what have you, and you're constant. It's not like I just push up guitars and push up drums and then go boom, there you go. You're constantly pushing and pulling to maximize interest at any one part, and so. Should something, like guitars can come down in the verses so that it sounds a bit more kind of chuggy and then bam, up they come for the choruses. So it's like, whoa, physically, I think on that mix, I made the choruses louder. I actually physically pushed the main fader up every time it hit on the chorus just to get some more bam, sort of thing. So no, it's not technically none of this stuff is difficult. It's just the time it takes to set it up.
Yeah, I hear you. So one thing I've always been curious about the vocal levels in that song is, as you said, Dave is singing in this kind of low register, and then the chorus he goes up. But the mix, it's still. I don't have to change the volume when I'm listening to it. It's still, it's pretty even more or less, even though it spikes a bit in the chorus. Did you have to boost the dB for Dave Grohl's low parts? Like how did you manage to have that somewhat equal?
Yeah, that's exactly what you do. I mean, you on the desk when I was working on mixing that particular track, and it was on analog desk. It's called a SSL desk, a solid state logic desk, and on those ones the faders are programmable, so you could program. Nowadays I could draw it into my computer and it'll do the same thing, but those days you literally could push the fader up and down, and it had an old-fashioned computer that would remember it and do it for you each time. And so what you're doing is you're mixing almost in different sections. So I'm getting the first section right, and then I've got to listen to how it goes into the next section, so exactly as you're saying, it doesn't happen, so that it doesn't suddenly go easy loud, or at the same time when I go back to the beginning and press play, it's not super quiet. So I mean that's exactly what I was talking about when I'm talking about a balance engineer. You're getting the balance right between the you want impact from the guitars in the choruses. You want it to sound exciting and like bang, absolute come, but not to the point where it just blows your stereo up because you've had it so loud for the quiet intro. So yeah, it's literally balancing. That's what you do, and you're going backwards and forwards. Listening on different speakers as well, like little crappy little speakers, like sort of thing you'd have on a terrible your mum would have in the kitchen to listen on the radio, something crappy, and then you'd be listening on these big high-end speakers. Interestingly, here's a little interesting thing, that when we'd finished the mixing, Dave was a friend of the guys who owned the Viper Room in LA, which was a club. River Phoenix, sadly died outside, and he was sort of known. I think he owned it, in fact. Anyway, I think I went there with Dave actually one night. We went to see Tenacious D play, actually. Yeah, well, him and Jack Black were big friends. But anyway, when we'd finished mixing the record, me and Gil and Dave went down to the Viper Room like one lunchtime just to crank it on the stereo. The club wasn't open, but they let us in, and we just wanted to hear what it sounded like in a club. And this hadn't been mastered or anything; it was just on a cassette, I think. So that was kind of fun, and it sounded great. It sounded really rocking.
That is a great story.
Yeah, it was really fun, and I was nervous because I was thinking, imagine if it sucks, but it didn't.
So, just one more technical question for that song. For me, when I edit videos, if I raise the dB, the hiss gets really loud. Usually, was there ever a hissing problem? Like, how do you get rid of the hiss?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's tricky. I mean, a lot of that also depends on how it's recorded. Because they'd recorded digitally, you don't get hiss with that at all. As long as there's not inherent in the vocal or the guitar, amplifier sound. And I'm trying to remember. I think they used Dolby, which was a noise reduction system, I think, on the tape. I can't really remember. It's so long ago. Which again was a way of getting rid of hiss on analog tape. But it's there. You're never going to get rid of it. I mean, particularly a quiet beginning like that. Nowadays there'd be different ways of doing it, and I could probably reduce, if there's any hiss, I could reduce it even more. But then there's only so much you can do, sort of thing. So that's why some old songs, when you crank them up, you're like, wow, it's quite hissy, but that's how it was. I mean, it's you worked as best you could to get rid of it, but some songs it's just impossible, particularly if it's just like vocal and guitar and it's quiet, and it's sort of, and you've got to have it loud enough so that when the loud section comes in, it's not just crazy. So yeah.
I actually consider the hiss like part of the mix. Like, for example, my ethnic background, I'm Armenian, and a lot of Armenian music recorded in the 70s and 60s has like an insane amount of hiss in the background. So it's just like, it's just part of the record. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I know. I mean, it's just, the technical ability of and the equipment that you have, and I'm sure like the Armenian guys are probably doing the best they possibly could.
Yeah.
But it's just like, look, this is what we get. You know what I mean? This is it, dude. Funnily enough, I found the other day, I was digging through some paperwork, and I found some notes that Dave had written to me about the mixes, about things he wanted to change on them slightly, things like, too much bass, this is not a bass record, this is a guitar record, things like that. It was just, I mean, it was very good natured, it was very easygoing, and the notes on Everlong were just written like a recipe, and it was really funny, like mix and stir at the end, and that's how you make a great rock track. It was great. He was lovely to work with, as you'd imagine.
That is awesome. So how do you, because in my mind, like, I mean, I've done a little bit of audio editing digital, but never analog. Mm-hmm. How do you boost or unboost, like splicing? Like, how does that work exactly with the mixing with analog?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I started in 1982, so I spent, the first, 20 years or something, maybe a bit less, working just with analog. And the basic process is that you record onto analog tape, which is, it's like, remember how you used to record onto a cassette, right? You remember cassettes? Right. Well, it's like that, but massive, okay, and really good quality. And you basically, you spread it out, so, you have 24 tracks on a reel of tape, and you have like, your bass guitar and your snare drum and your kick drum all separated out. And then they come up on the desk, on the analog desk. And it's literally, that's when you see these in recording studios, you see the massive desk. That's what it is, so that all the individual faders have an individual instrument on them. And then using the fader, I can, ride the level up and down, and I can add the EQ and, whatever else I want to, effects or something like that, on each individual track. But nowadays, of course, you do everything in the box. So it's, it's the same thing. It's just done digitally. But yeah, that's why they physically had to be these huge consoles that you'd work on, which is why I used to travel around the world to mix things, because it was so heavy to send the tapes, which are, they weigh like 5 pounds each reel. They're heavy things. it was cheaper to fly me over than it was to get the tapes and a few of the band to come over to the studio in London, because it was physically, they're heavy, so it's easier to go to them, sort of thing. Nowadays, people, you just send the whole album in, like, I don't know, 30 gigabytes or something, and the thing rocks up and it's in my inbox.
So, Chris, what was your experience like working on My Hero?
There was a couple of tracks, My Hero, and I think Hey Johnny Park, maybe some more of them, but I definitely used the room sound. Basically, what they'd done is they wanted the drums to have a certain big, clattery, exciting, big sound. And at the back of the studio was a parking garage that was, you could close it. It was enclosed. And so they set the drum kit up outside in this parking garage, which is unusual. It's not the sort of thing you would normally do. And the recording was done. I wasn't there, but I think that's where the recording was actually done, or the kit was like aimed at the parking lot. But basically, it created this massive reverberation room sound on the drums, which had a really unique sound. So the big slamming sound that you hear on things like My Hero are A, double track drums, and B, recorded in a parking garage. And so, if I get young bands who sort of go, hey, yeah, we want to get that sound, I'm going, well, I'm not absolutely sure I can get that. And then, and that's sort of tricky because you've got to try and make it sound big and exciting, but not overpowering, sort of thing. So it just becomes just like, all I can hear is drums, So but you want it to sound exciting. And then on top of that, there was a second drum kit playing some slightly different parts. I can't really remember, but it was playing together, but also playing some slightly different rhythm in the verse, I think. So again, I had to try and figure out a way to make the drums work together. And it was just a case of trial and error, just like one bit louder, one a bit underneath. It was tricky, but it worked okay. But a lot of people have asked me, like, oh, how does he play that bit in, I'm going, well, it's two drum kits. It's two different parts.
Was it him playing the same drum kit twice, or was it literally two separate kits?
He would play, I think, I don't actually know that, whether it was two separate kits, but he definitely played two different kits on two different takes. So he'd finish the one and then he'd go back and play another one, playing a different like rhythm or part or whatever over the top of it. But again, once I kind of got that sorted out, the guitars, you just feed them in. But it was a great, I love that song, My Hero. I think it was just a fantastic song. It was, say, once we got in a groove in the studio, it was, it was fairly straightforward. I mean, Dave would come down in the evening sometime. If they had some time off, we'd go out to eat or whatever. But most of the time I was just in there on my own, just with my assistant, Jason, who was great and a fantastic assistant. He was brilliant. And Skip Saylor was a great studio as well. A really cool studio. I do remember, actually, one funny thing. I do remember when I was mixing that, the studio did a lot of rap kind of artists as well. And so this is 97. And there was some beef going on between some rap guys. And I think in the other studio, there was somebody like Dr. Dre or somebody like that before he had his own setup. There was a kind of big guy. And there was obviously some worry because they had like armed guards like standing at the front in the entranceway. And I remember like the first time I came in, and this guy, with like a gun, he's like, "Who are you?" And I'm like going, "I'm working in Studio A." And then, I had my little Toyota Camry or whatever the hell it was. I was like, dude, I am not a threat, and then after like a couple of days, they're like, "Hey man," kind of thing. I was just like, "Okay, sorry." But yeah, it was quite funny. And they were just there for a few days, but I just remember that rocking up and it was like, wow, okay, he's a dude with a gun. That was pretty heavy, but it was cool. It was good. It was really, I was just generally there on my own doing it,
Is there anything about the way he recorded music or the way he enjoyed listening to mixes that was stuck out, that was different than other artists you work with?
No. Unfortunately, I'd love to say there was, but no, it was, he would just sit there and go, yeah, okay, yeah, sounds great. He was very easygoing about it, kind of thing. Or there might be one thing we'd discuss, but no. I mean, I'd know he'd arrived because the door would this size 10 DM boot would go pow, and the door would fly open, and hi, I'm here, and that was it. And it would come Dave, and the day would start. It was great. It was fun. It was just really, I have very fond memories of it, and even as long ago as it was, and it was, and it was the gift that keeps on giving, man. I mean, people still, name check their record and say, oh, we want the guitars to sound like the Foo Fighters. I'm like, okay, well.
Awesome.
Yeah, hopefully I can do even better than that now.
So moving on to another song, what was it like for you working on Monkey Wrench?
Say that was the first one I did, and it was finding, that was the one where I had to find my way around the recording, and sort of like, okay, this is how they've done the drums, or this is how they've done the guitars, and okay, what do we want to get out of this? It's like, what can I do? And so I'd have to experiment a little bit. It took a little while of like trying things out and thinking, that's not really working. And I knew Dave didn't want to use compression on the drum, so I had to scrap that. I couldn't use that automatically, so I had to find ways of making the drums, particularly the drums, sound as slamming and as exciting as possible without using the default, things that you have in your kit bag that you use. But what was happening was they were recording, it was a very early digital Pro Tools recording. And then because in those days, Pro Tools was really expensive to either buy or rent. So they were dumping everything onto analog multitrack for me to record, to mix off of. So it was recorded digital and mixed analog, which was kind of, different, to say the least. Because it was pretty early days of Pro Tools.
How do you mix analog a digital file?
Well, it was recorded onto tape, like as though it was just literally bounced onto tape in real time. So yeah, I mean, it must have been a real schlep for the guys up at Grandmaster doing it. Every time they finish a track and gone, yeah, that's okay, and then put it onto 24 track tapes for me to mix 48 track analog down at Skip Sailor, which is where I mixed the record in Hollywood. What I did was I used different EQs on the drums, which I had on different faders, and would just make them louder and quieter during the song. So when it gets to the chorus and I want the drums to cut through more, I would push up more of the bottom end in the snare drum or a bit more top end in the kick drum to really punch through. Things like that. I was very canny about it to make it work. And with the guitars, it was the same thing. It's like, okay, well, how far can I push it before it starts to sound, ridiculous or unlistenable or whatever? Because I really wanted it to sound as exciting as I possibly could. That was the thing for me. I didn't want them to live back. It's like, I'm sure a lot of mixers would say the same thing. What you never want is for somebody to go, yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
You want people to go either, what a racket, or well, hopefully they're going to say that, rather than that's terrible. But you want people to have an opinion. So I've always want to make things as exciting as possible, as within my ability, so that you live or die by it. You know what I mean? It's not like people go, yeah, pretty good. That's you don't want that.
That's the worst. That's the Let's Be Friends equivalent of music.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's nice. Yeah.
It's not you, it's me.
Yeah. So it was the first one I did. I wanted to make it as exciting as possible, and it's not difficult. It's an incredibly exciting song from beginning to end. And I think that one we didn't really. In fact, I think they were pretty happy with it. In fact, I remember Dave. The one comment I remember Dave saying at the end of it, and he goes, "It sounds like a record already." I think he was expecting the mixing to be more problematical or more difficult, whatever. So I hope he liked it. I mean, the record came out, they didn't remix it, so I guess they liked it. But that one we didn't really do very much. I mean, again, it's a pretty simple song. It's very exciting. There's the long bit where Dave, goes da 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 da. It sounds like he's not taking a breath, and that was over like 2 tracks, I think, something like that. So there was obviously a bit where he ran out of puff, and then started singing again on a different track to take it over. And again, just to make it as exciting as possible, because that's like a big climax in the song. But yeah, it was a really fun track to start with, and I say it kind of set the benchmark. Really, it's like, okay, if we can get this one to, this is sounding as exciting as everything else has got to meet this now. That's what you kind of want to get. And I think we may have, at the very end of the album, we may have gone back. I don't necessarily think to that one, but we may have gone back to a couple of tracks, which quite often happens. And you go, okay, well, this one didn't quite get the mark because, we've subsequently made this sound better. So let's go back, open that mix back up again, get the desk reset, and just make a couple of adjustments. Or, they've listened to it for a couple of weeks and think, you know what, I think the backing vocals are too loud or something like that. So you'd make a couple of little changes at the end. But Monkey Wrench was a boom. There you go.
That's awesome. So that part you were talking about, the climax, where he ends up at one point just like holding that scream note.
Yeah.
This, I guess, is more of a production question, but how do you record that without the mic booming?
Well, just you can put a pad on a microphone. There's like a little it's like it's like a muffler on an exhaust pipe. It'll cut down the racket, and you do the same thing with a microphone, so it stops the pressure, the amount of pressure distorting the microphone. And also you just you would get someone to stand back a little bit from the microphone, kind of things, and really bellow. And boy, can Dave bellow. It really is incredibly loud and really exciting. He can really nail those screams. So yeah, and again, and then just I think I put some delays and stuff on it to make it really kind of accentuate it, sort of thing. But yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, no, I think that's really cool. I guess, did you have to lower the dB on that one to make it not super loud?
I honestly don't remember. I mean, possibly, yeah. I don't remember. I mean, it's one of those things that when you're mixing stuff, each mix is a little bit different, and like I'm mixing a record right now, and you come across certain things and like, oh, that's that too loud. It's a constant state of flux, yeah. All mixes, until you finally go, yeah, it's done. And even on the final listen through, I'm going, stop it, I just got to change that. There'll be one little thing that's still bugging me, sort of thing.
Yeah. So last question about Monkey Wrench. At the very beginning, one of the parts that I like is that like half-second stop, right? Like their guitar's quiet.
Yeah.
And then it goes, was it written like that, or did you guys like in production decide to do that?
I don't know whether that stop was something that Gil came up with or whatever. I don't know. But I do know that when I had to like mute everything on the desk at that point, because I wanted it to be like a dead stop, and I didn't want any overhanging sort of noise or hiss or anything like that. So it was like bam, and almost as many fingers as I could to mute things, and then let them go again straight away, and then go on, and then the next section, bam, they do the same thing. So yeah, that was kind of fun, but I don't know. You'd have to ask Gil. So what was happening was they would get it done. I would start mixing, and I'd finish at about, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, something like that. And then I'd cruise by to Grandmaster with a DAT tape, which is what we used to do back then, the kind of rough mixes, that overnight mix. And I would give it to Gil and Dave, and they're sweating away doing guitars and stuff. And then they could listen to it, and then in the morning they could come down to the studio and we'd finalize the mix. That's basically how it was going on. And so I then I could go out and go for a drink in Hollywood with some friends while these poor bastards were still working till 3 a.m.
In terms of screaming, I wasn't going to ask you about this song, but it just popped in my head. The actual song, Color and the Shape, he's screaming throughout the whole song. How is that one to mix?
Again, I mean, it's just you just deal with what you've got, kind of thing. So if I push up the faders and go, okay, he is screaming his ass off in this track. Okay, well let's find out how this works. I mean, it's not like you have kind of like, okay, this is a screaming track preset, this is what we do. You know what I mean? It's like you always have to sort of, you deal with what you get. I mean, sometimes you'll be mixing songs and there'll be something completely left field, and you're thinking, okay, well, I don't know what they were thinking, but all right, I've got to make that now work within the context of the song. And that's my job. That's what I'm employed to do, is to make, this disparate bunch of musical instruments and blend it into something that sounds, people can put on a record and go, oh yeah, I love that, rather than what the fuck is that? Like this trombone come popping out at one point. I've got to make it work. And that's, what I get paid to do. And hopefully most of the time I get it right, and so the Foo Fighters mixing was not complicated. I mean, because it was it's just say guitar, bass, and drums, and I was lucky. It was incredibly exciting songs, really well delivered. I mean, the one interesting thing with Dave is he, and I wasn't expecting this, but again, it wasn't really a problem, is that he double tracks and triple tracks his vocal. In other words, he sings it 2 or 3 times to create one lead vocal. Most people would just sing it once and it's just a lead vocal. And he does it again 2 or 3 times to get this sound that he prefers on his voice. And he's very good at it. You know, I mean, a lot of people can't do it very well. But it creates this sort of slightly chorusy almost sort of sound. And so that was something that we had to work on all the time. And there was a couple of moments where Gil and Dave would like argue back and forth, and Gil would say, let's just have one vocal on this part, and Dave would be like, oh, I can't do it, you know, kind of thing. It was very funny, you know, and it was all good fun, you know. It wasn't any big drama about it. But I remember that was sort of, so you get a good vocal sound, you're thinking, and I've got another one, you know, and another one, and I had to make sure that everything worked together. So there was this vocal sound that Dave has, and to make it work. Again, not a big drama, but it was an interesting thing to have to go, okay, this is how the Foo Fighters should sound, you know.
That is awesome.
Yeah, it was. I mean, there was lots of crazy, you know, little things, but you know, that I'm remembering actually as we're speaking. But as I say, it was fun. It was really good fun to do. Interestingly, I never met Brad Cook. I've spoken to him, the guy who recorded it, apart from one time I briefly popped my head in when I handed over a tape to say, here you go, here's a mix to listen to. And I'd like to have hung out with him more, actually, because, you know, he's worked on some great records, and he was there for the recording of the whole thing, you know. So, you know, but unfortunately, because he was still recording it and I was doing the mixing, we never hung out. We never got to see each other, literally, the whole process, which is crazy.
That's nice. Wow.
Yeah, I know, and it's a real shame, and our paths have never crossed again. Which it would be great to. I'd really. I mean, I think we hooked up on Facebook. I think possibly, but yeah, that'd be great. It'd be a really fun thing to spend an afternoon just chatting about.
Aside from the Foo Fighters, are there any particular memorable experiences you've had throughout your career that just stick out to you?
Yeah, that's a whole new. I think the one of the things I always remember, which is just a funny scenario when you find yourself in a situation and it's just like, how did I get here? Was I remember working on a record in Vermont, actually just south of the border, the Canadian border, and I was working on a record there, and it was in the middle of winter, so it was really cold, right? And we got this. We were working. The studio owner came to us one day, and I was working with an English band, and he said, "Can any of you guys play football?" And we were like going, well, yeah, I guess we can play football, you know, soccer. And he goes, okay, because Deep Purple are in town and they want to have a game of soccer. So I'm going, okay. So we ended up going down to, it's this place called Stowe, which is like a skiing village or something. And we ended up going down to the sort of the village green, and I'm there in like jeans and, you know, this is, I don't even know when it was, and like a leather jacket or something, trying to keep warm. I was woefully unprepared for a Vermont winter when I came home from England. And Deep Purple are there in a full football kit. And we ended up running around playing football in snow, in like 2 feet of snow. And I'm freezing my ass off. And I'm so unfit that after like about 20 minutes, I had to go off to the side of the pitch and throw up. And I've got these old guys like Richie Blackmore, or these people running around playing football who are fit as a butcher's dog, and they're and it was like, what am I doing here? This is the weirdest situation I've been in. Well, there you go. Yeah, shit like that happens. You know, it's the sort of stuff that happens in a career.
Were they any good? The guys in
They were great. Yeah, we were terrible. I mean, these guys were like 20 years older than all of us, and so much better at football than we were. But it was just a fun, you know. And then Ian Gillan, I think it was, the singer, came back to the studio and we had a few beers or whatever. But yeah, random things that happen. Yeah, you know, I mean, just crazy stuff happens, through the years. And because we were, in those days, there were so many studios around the world, and you'd fly in and work, and you'd go out. And I worked with Anthrax doing an album in New York, and that was really, really fun. Lovely, lovely people. And I remember at night they were going to some award ceremony, and they said, "Well, you got to come." And I was like, "Okay." And they said, "What are you going to wear?" I go, "Well, by pure chance, I don't know why, but I had a suit with me. I think had to go to a wedding or something. Anyway, I said, well, I've got a suit. And they said, well, can you wear that? And they ended up making me wear that and a bowler hat and carry like a sort of a rolled up umbrella. They were parading me around like this sort of like archetypal English guy that was their mascot for the night. So yeah, it was fun. It was just, it's just silly, but fun.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe for more because there is a lot more to come. All the videos on my channel are original. I'm the one filming, editing, and conducting all the interviews. So if you guys like what you see and you want to support, the best way to do so is honestly just to subscribe. Thanks for watching.